Hello. This is Hug Me, I'm Insane. My name is Perry Johnson, and today I'm going to talk about negative emotions. Why? Because many of us have asked the question, myself included, when will I ever be happy? So in order to ask that question, we need to discuss the corollary of happiness, the opposite of happiness, which is unhappiness. Or another way to define it would be negative emotions. And sometimes we can feel trapped by negative emotions. And I've certainly been a victim of my own negative thinking and many times felt like I have no way out and have felt considerable despondency at the idea of ever finding happiness. And I'm going to talk about happiness and our pursuit of it in another video. Today, I think it's important that we discuss the negative emotions, and that's why I'm dedicating an entire episode to that topic. And more specifically, the 4 truths of negative emotions as discovered by Perry Johnson. Here we go. Number 1. Negative emotions are necessary. Now, that's uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable saying that. I don't even like admitting that. There's a big part of me that still rejects the concept that at some point in my life, I'm going to be feeling negative emotions again. I am enormously resistant to the idea of feeling negative emotions. That being said, I also understand that indeed they are necessary. And why do I say that? One of the things that we are doing here as spiritual beings is we are here to experience contrast. The divine wants us to experience contrast. And when you think about it, we see contrast everywhere in nature and in the universe and in the stars and everything. Things are born, things die, birth, death, the oscillations of life. And we see these oscillations and waves repeated throughout nature, patterns repeated throughout nature. And so it stands to reason that our feelings would also be among those entities which are in a pattern. And so if I look objectively at my feelings, they oscillate. They go up, they go down. They go up, they go down. The challenge is when we are trapped in negative emotions, whether that is by way of life circumstance or through our trauma or through our negative thinking or through the situations that we often find ourselves seemingly trapped in which we feel we have no choice, we can very quickly become bogged down in the negative emotions. And I'll speak to that in a second, but I think the thing that probably helped me the most in regards to my feelings and the fact that I have feelings and that sometimes those feelings are negative is understanding that this is by design. And one of the things that I'm here to do is to experience that swing from the negative to the positive and that it's okay. That's actually what I'm here to do. So that is my first truth. As a spiritual being, negative emotions are necessary. And I don't want to say a necessary evil because that's vilifying them. And they do serve a purpose. And I'm going to get to that point coming up pretty quick. In the meantime, let's move on to number 2. The second truth about negative emotions is that they require familiarity. When what the heck does that mean? At the surface, in saying that, you might think, well, of course I'm familiar with my negative emotions. I'm the one damn well feeling them all the time. That is just like, that's stupid. What a stupid truth. It's obvious. What I mean is my understanding of the different types of negative emotions are critical for my healing. And by that, I mean my awareness around specifically what it is that I'm feeling then points to the correct course of action, if a course of action is required, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But it's important that I'm able to name what it is that I'm feeling. so that I can then communicate to others what's going on with me. And in doing so, take away some of the power that that negative emotion is holding over me. And so, as an example, if I've had an interaction with somebody and I'm feeling quite angry about it, it's important that I'm able to identify that I feel angry, which then leads to looking what's underneath the anger. Because anger is always the top level. It's just the shell for what's really going on underneath, which more often than not, well, almost exclusively is more negative emotion. And usually that involves some kind of abandonment or fear or betrayal or something of that nature. And so again, it's important that I'm able to identify what that feels like. And I know that in early recovery, when I first started getting sober, this concept of becoming familiar with what it is you're feeling was beat into my head. And I, at that time, was faced with the paradigm of change or die. I needed to change my habits. I needed to change everything, basically. Otherwise, I was facing my own demise at my own hand by way of my addiction. And so that led to me putting myself into self-imposed emotion school, you could say, where in the beginning, when I was asked what I was feeling, the best I could do would be to state, I don't know, everything's fucked. And that would be the best I could do, which was fine. That's just where I was at. And it was a starting point. At least I was talking about my feelings. And then as I got better at identifying those feelings, I was able to hone in on what was going on with me in my inner landscape. And I could tell you, well, I'm feeling some sadness. I'm feeling lonely. I'm grieving the end of a relationship. I feel sadness that somebody who came to visit is leaving and I won't be able to see them for a long time. And being able to do that, being able to identify what was happening with me, and then couple that with talking about what that feeling is with somebody else in my support group, has been the bedrock of what has kept me sober and kept my mental health above water, where I'm not being pulled down into these cesspools of negative thinking where I feel like I'm drowning and I'm never going to get out. And everything is dark and everything is pressing down on me. And I don't understand what's happening. And that is far, far worse than having some sadness pass through me when I'm missing somebody, as opposed to that person leaving and the sadness cumulatively adding to that dark cesspool. And me descending into this dialogue of how nothing is fair and the world is against me and everybody's abandoned me, and this paradigm of self-pity, which is very destructive. So, truth number 2, negative emotions require my familiarity. And that brings us on to truth number 3. Resistance gives negative emotions power. Or to put it another way, and anybody that's ever talked to me about mental health, particularly recovery, will have heard me say this a billion times. What we resist persists. What we resist persists. And what does that mean? So, if I'm spending a lot of time in a certain state, or if I'm spending any time in a certain state, and tell myself that I wish this wasn't happening, and I'm trying to push the thing away that I'm feeling, that feeling is there for a reason. It wants to be felt. And the reasons for it wanting to be felt vary depending on the situation. But regardless of that situation, that feeling wants to be stood up and seen. And it doesn't require me pushing it away or attempting to push it away. What it requires is my attention and my love. It requires me to love it. I don't have to like it, but it's important that that I'm not rejecting that feeling, because it will only make it come back even harder and stand up and be more forceful in trying to be heard and to be seen, if that makes sense. I mean, I realize I'm talking about emotions now, but I do have the understanding and I do have the concept in my mind of my feelings being one of the most important guides, one of the most important tools that I have in terms of what's actually happening. Because what I'm feeling will never lie to me. My head very often will and does lie to me. I sure as shit can't trust what's going on in my head. But my feelings will never lead me astray. They're happening for a reason. They're the mind's reflection in the body, and they're the voice of truth. And so if I'm stuck and embroiled in some kind of a negative emotion that's chronic and isn't going anywhere, that's happening for a reason. There's something there that requires my attention and requires my healing. And I'll get to that in a second. I'm gonna get to this in a second. But by wishing them away, it only makes them come back harder. And if I attempt to deny them or subvert them or minimize them in some way, then very often they'll come back in another way that's often a lot more difficult to deal with. They'll come out in a sideways way, like an outburst. It will lead to something else equally difficult to deal with, if not more difficult to deal with, if I'm not addressing the thing in the here and the now. I hope that makes sense. So to summarize number 3, and this is a very, very important one, my negative emotions are a part of me and require just as much of my love and attention and respect as my positive emotions do. And while I don't spend any time wishing that I could be feeling negative emotions, when they come up, I've learned not to reject them, but instead give them credence, to pay attention to them and to honor them by talking about what's happening, and not ever saying that I wish I wasn't feeling this way. I wish I was just super happy right now, because I know at some point down the road I will experience contrast, and there'll be periods where I'm experiencing joy and happiness and elation and all those other good things, laughter and serenity and all the things that we want all the time, but can never sustain, because we're here to experience contrast. My 4th truth in regards to negative emotions is that they often require action. They often require action. They don't always require action. So when do we know when we're supposed to be taking action and when we're supposed to just allow this negative emotion to run its course? Well, I think the most important part about this 4th truth is talking about it, which speaks to the 2nd truth about being familiar with what it is that we're feeling, so that we can effectively communicate that emotion to another person and to be able to dialogue about it. So sometimes when I'm feeling negative emotions, I'm required to take action when, in talking about that negative emotion, I've identified a pattern. Or a member of my support group, my good buddy who knows me quite well, has identified a pattern that perhaps I wasn't seeing. That's why we get trapped in patterns. We don't see them. And so here I am, yet again, flailing around in another shame cycle, flip-flopping around in the field of shit that is the result of Perry's decision-making in regards to whatever it is, in regards to X. And that can be anything. That can be my inaction in terms of doing the things that I know I need to be doing, but I fail to do them. Or I don't fail to do them, I choose not to do them. Or the realization that I am now experiencing the result of yet another dysfunctional relationship. And why do I keep choosing these dysfunctional relationships? And so now I'm beating myself up for the decisions that I made to go forward with situations that I knew were not right for me. And I'm feeling like shit about myself, which is code for a shame over. Or perhaps I acted out in anger yet again. And rather than respond to a situation, I reacted to a situation because I wasn't using my tools. And I acted on the anger. And when I act on anger, the results are almost always regrettable. And now I have to make amends to people. And I'm feeling guilty yet again. That's not a good feeling. And so that feeling can inspire further action in regards to work that I need to do around my decision making when I'm placed in situations in which I don't feel like I have control, or in situations where I feel like I don't understand what's happening. And sometimes that can create unmanageable feelings, and we don't like those feelings, and we act irrationally in regards to those feelings. And this, again, leads me back to us having familiarity over what it is that we're feeling, being able to identify those feelings and to know what action we need to take. It's not always readily apparent to me because I'm used to these things. It's what I know. And I will experience all kinds of resistance in terms of having to face change. We do not like change. And in other situations, no action is necessary. And the only thing that we're required to do is to feel that feeling and to move through it. And feeling sadness at somebody coming to visit and then leaving again is a good example of that. Sometimes it's sad to see people go. But that doesn't mean that I have to run out and obliterate that feeling of sadness. In fact, if that's what my brain is telling me to do, that points to different action that needs to happen, because that's addiction. And so in understanding that, the appropriateness of what our brain is telling us to do, again, comes down to understanding the feeling and then discussing with somebody that knows us, who's in our support group, about the best course of action, if there is a course of action. What I know is in navigating those 4 truths of my negative emotions, I sure as hell can't do that by myself. There is no way. There is no way. Me attempting to manage that part of who I am is asking for disaster, because so much of that stuff exists in my shadow, and much of that stuff I can't see clearly. In hindsight, it becomes clear. But when I'm in it, I need guidance. I guess the takeaway in terms of breaking this down to 4 truths, as I call them, can be summarized by saying that whatever it is that I'm feeling is okay. I might not like it. In fact, in terms of negative emotions, I don't like it. But that it's okay. And it's that thing where I make friends with the things that I don't necessarily like, but know are a part of me anyway. And to not reject that part of myself. That self-love and self-acceptance includes the unpleasantries, the sides that I wish I didn't have. But by wishing them away, only makes them come back harder. And so that's what I do today. I attempt to give all aspects and all sides of myself my love and attention. I attempt to soothe my wounded inner child, because that's the responsibility of the adult Perry, is to look after the little wounded 5-year-old Perry that's still in there and sometimes will still run the show. Because that little kid, he's not going anywhere. And he just wants to feel safe and have fun in the world. And so I do whatever I can to give him that. Thanks for listening.